What's your first memory of arriving in Vietnam? Your first impression?
Oh, it was stifling hot. It was, we got off the plane and somebody picked us up in a Jeep and took us to the brigade main base. And then a few days later, we were out in the middle of a fire base out in the middle of nowhere.
That is you when you were in Vietnam with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. And I put that you served in Vietnam and Cambodia because you were part of the, I guess you could call it, I would only call it the infamous Cambodian Invasion because it created such a stir here at home. My question to you, Bill, is when you were serving in the 199th, you were part of this operation. Were you aware at all about how this was being experienced back home?
Not really, no. We got our orders to go in and they air mobile us from one end of the country to the other. And then the rest is history. We just went out and did what we were supposed to do. Didn't really realize what was going on until way after the fact. And
I think there are plenty of Vietnam veterans listening now who probably say, oh, yeah, I was in Cambodia earlier. But this was the first time it was announced officially that that the U.S. was crossing the Cambodian border in pursuit of the enemy. I love this photograph. This is, somebody called this the first selfie ever taken.
That's why I have that, so I can get back to my daughters especially. They think their generation created the selfie, but we had it way back in the 60s too. It's just that we didn't promote it. So.
And one of the things that's great about your photos is it gives me such a great insight into the period in which you served, 1969, 1970. Jim Roberts, we had him on last week. He served in Vietnam the same years, the same time frame. And, it wasn't a popular time to be in the Army. The war was unpopular by that time. There was a lot of unrest within the U.S. military. And I see, your hair's looking a little shaggy there, and you're...
Well, that's kind of depressing, Todd, because I thought I had a lot of hair when I was 21. But, you broke that bubble.
So, and I see you have kind of a scruffy mustache.
I had grown, and it was just by nerves and accident, I guess. I was growing a handlebar mustache. And, it was nerves, being out in the middle of nowhere, nothing to do. And I got proud of it, and I kept it until after we come back from Cambodia is when I got to go on R&R. And because I waited a long time to go, I went to Australia. And I was getting ready to get on a plane, and the guy had the greatest job in the world, said, you know what, you can't go, you have to shave that mustache to leave the country. And naturally, I said, you got to be kidding me. And he said, no, you have two options. You can shave it, because the military cut had to be at the corners of your mouth.
The corners of the mouth.
Shave it and go to Australia, or he goes, you can go back to your 5 days there. So it sort of broke my heart at the time, but I changed it.
How did you take to Army life? I mean, in some of your pictures, you're smiling, and I think that's just your personality. You're such a good-natured person. Did you like the Army?
Not really. No, once I was in it. But I think when I look at some of them, I thought of that too. You were scared, especially when we were away. You were always scared, and you had terrible things happen. I can remember sending a picture of me standing beside a tank with a smile, probably. And that was right after probably the worst week that I had in the service. And I think you just didn't want to, if whatever you were sending home, you didn't want to make things worse for the people that were, your parents and whoever, your friends and loved ones and everything.
What's your first memory of arriving in Vietnam? Your first impression?
Oh, it was stifling hot. It was, we got off the plane and somebody picked us up in a Jeep and took us to the brigade main base. And then a few days later, we were out in the middle of a fire base out in the middle of nowhere. And it was always hot, and it rained constantly. Even in the dry season, it rained. It's just all day. So.
And here's a picture of you that looks like a pretty muddy location here.
Yeah, that's one of the fire bases, probably because of the way all the ponchos and that are hanging out. We probably had just come in for a mission, and so everything was dry and hot, and that's the way it looked before when you come in. And you were maybe 72 hours because a 3-day stand on. But the first day was the day you come in, so you didn't know if you were coming in at 10 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the second day, you got cleaned up and you got the loaf and do some details and things. But then the third day is the day you went back on. Wow. So this was probably and then they put you on a bunker and you split it up and you pull guard duty at night. And that's so knowing with all that stuff, you had ponchos, poncho liners, which was, probably the best thing to have during the rainy season. And then the next day you got ready to go out again usually. So
can you tell me what these missions were? What were you doing on these patrols? What were they like?
Well, we usually went out platoon size, and you were usually on either some kind of recon, like they may have saw what they thought might be fire bases or something like that, or they were ambushes. And there was always ambushes because when you come to trails, typically you'd set up either an overnight ambush or just for a few hours during the day. And so we did that for, I guess the first couple months was okay in the sense that, typically you didn't have large scale enemy coming at you. You get guys coming up the trail, and then you'd do what you normally do when that happens. Or sometimes you'd come into base camps. Well, some of them you could tell they were old or abandoned, or some looked fairly fresh, and somebody scooted away because they didn't have the manpower with them, to do anything. So that was pretty much what we did.
Was the fighting in Cambodia different from the fighting you had experienced before or after?
Yeah, it was definitely from when we were in before. We were normally doing ambushes, and maybe at the most you'd run into 4 or 5 guys. But in Cambodia, the first night there, we were a division or something assaulted us. It was an all-night firefight, and the next day there had to be 50 or 60 Vietnamese that were laying on. We didn't even have concertina wire. When the cavalry left, they left one strand around. That's all we had. And our company got in late. We didn't even have time to put claymores and everything out because it got dark. And then about 3 a.m, they hit us, and it was all night. And then the next day, our platoon, we ended up doing patrols around while they were, which actually was the better thing because the other people were, taking bodies out and things and collecting weapons. But we went out on patrol along the edge of the perimeter out there where the jungle and everything was, and we found a lot of blood trails. So we probably got a lot more of the enemy than they accounted for because there was a lot of they took people with them.
There are so many interesting people in the veterans community, and there tend to be, and don't take this the wrong way, there tend to be a lot of interesting people who served in the Marine Corps, especially. And
I guess it lends itself to some type of eccentricity.
Now, I didn't say that. You said that. And this is a picture of you in Iraq. When did you join the Marines?
I'm sorry?
When did you join, and why?
I did the delayed entry program, which means you can sign your contract up to a year before you leave for boot camp. So in that regard, I joined in '99.
Okay.
But I left for boot camp in the summer of 2000.
What made you want to join the Marine Corps?
Well, when I started high school, I got really into sports, and I knew that it was pretty typical. I grew up in the suburbs, so it was pretty typical for people to go to college. My high school bragged about the percentage of its graduates that went off to college. And I thought I wanted to do college someday, but I thought I'd had enough of school and I'd want to do something that was more in line with sports. And I wasn't a good enough athlete to go to college for sports. And I thought, well, I bet the military would have all that physical exertion and the intensity and the competition that the military would have what I'm looking for, in my athletic interests. And I was into boxing and wrestling, so I was already into combat sports. And so that also pushed me towards the military. And so the summer after my freshman year, I went on vacation with a friend of mine to the beach. And his older brother brought a friend, and that guy had just gotten out of Marine Corps boot camp, and he was telling me all about it and all the training he was going to get and all the fun he was having. I was like, well, then that's it. So
you were sold.
Yeah. So the summer after my freshman year, I knew I wanted to do it. And then 2 years later, the summer after my junior year, I signed the paperwork. And then a year after that, the year 2000, that's when I left for boot camp. So I joined the military to be an Arabic linguist. And so they sent me to Monterey, California for a year and a half to study Arabic intensively. And September 11th happens just a little bit past the halfway point of my Arabic education. And so all of us who were in Arabic class were like, oh, well, this has some pretty direct relevance to us.
All of a sudden, you're very important personnel.
Yeah, I mean, prior to September 11th, all the way back to when I was a freshman in high school back in 1996, it was Bill Clinton and, we knew that there were people that didn't like us in the Middle East or that were interested in hurting America in various ways. That wasn't a surprise, but it didn't feel that threatening back then.
Right. No, it didn't.
So I started learning Arabic in 2000, the fall of 2000 after boot camp. And I was like, well, this will be an interesting language, but it didn't occur to me that it would be like the most crucial language that our military needed at the time.
Yes. What are we looking at here in this picture?
So this is Babylon.
The famous Babylon.
Yeah, the city of Babylon, Hammurabi, Nebuchadnezzar. And I think the picture is a little bit small on my screen, but the walls in that picture that look straight are walls that Saddam Hussein had built. And kind of more towards the fore part of the picture and to the left, the walls that are more rounded or don't look so good, those are the original walls of Babylon.
Right, the ruins.
The ruins, right? And so what Saddam Hussein had done was he started rebuilding Babylon. And I can't remember if there's another picture that shows more of that or not, but he started rebuilding it, and he would stamp his initials in like every 100th brick or something like that. And so he got that idea from ancient Babylonian kings who would do the same thing. Oh, yeah. So I kind of wanted that international experience. Prior to the Marine Corps, the only international travel I had was Niagara Falls. So when I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh and I always liked the past, I always liked history. So when I went to college and started thinking, well, what can I do that brings all this together? It kind of naturally pushed me towards classics and Near Eastern studies and archaeology. And when I thought, well, where would I want to do this? Everyone said, well, you speak Arabic, go work in Egypt, go work in Syria, because you could work in Syria back then. And my advisor said, actually, if you work in Turkey, you kind of get a little bit of everything. And so that's what I did. I ended up working in Turkey.
You ended up working in Turkey. And the thing that makes an archaeologist, I'm a historian, you're an archaeologist. What makes an archaeologist different from a historian fundamentally, I think, is that you guys love dirt.
Well, yeah, we love digging, and we every summer. Well, some people go at different seasons in the summer. Like in Egypt, they work in winter quite often. But for me, I would go every summer to Turkey and dig for a couple months. And it's very physical, and that's another thing that I really liked about it. I wanted to be physical. I wanted to lift stones and dig holes, and I was able. Archaeology is a beautiful blend of that.